Shalom covering, warm welcome to this third section of the Pesach teaching that we've been doing. I hope you'll have been blessed and I hope God has really blessed each one of you. And it's nice to see that people are learning, people are absorbing, internalizing many things of the Torah. Today we are going to do part 3 of the 3 series during Pesach. So part 1 we studied about the chametz. Part 2 we studied about the unleavened bread, the matzah, right? The bread of affliction. And the third section today is going to be about the wine. And we're going to put many things in perspective. We're going to understand how the Pesach was performed in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple in Yerushalayim. We're going to understand deeply or sufficiently the role of wine in its many complexities, how it was used during the Seders and why it is used during every Shabbat and every festival. Why were there wine offerings also that were used on the Mizbeach in the temple? Now, the Passover that happened in Mitzrayim 3,500 years ago, the original Passover, was unlike any other Passover that you would ever. In fact, it's the only one, and it's not going to happen again. And this Passover is called Pesach Mitzrayim. If you read the Mishnah, it'll tell you it's called Pesach Mitzrayim. Every Passover after that, in every succeeding year, is called Pesach Dorot, Pesach of the generations. And all those Pesachs were completely different to the original Pesach. Okay? So point number 1 is, let's not mix the two. What was the original Pesach? God had to take them out from Mitzrayim. In hurry, they picked up what they could get, whatever was in their hands, the dough that was not even fully needed, and they walked out in a hurry, right? And they were coming out from slavery. They were coming out from a place of deep distress, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Okay, so they never had time to relax. In the succeeding generations, every Pesach Dorot, they were not in slavery anymore. So therefore, it was a different Pesach. Point number 1 is that it was a remembrance of what happened in Mitzrayim. And they had to recount everything of all the great wonders and all the great things God had done for the children of Israel. And they had to recount Magid. They had to recount it to the children, so the children would be imbued with the essence of Pesach, and every generation therefore would know what that Pesach was. And then they would enact and they would perform every year this Pesach. Now, on the 14th of the month, in the first month, that's in the month of Nisan, the Pesach was normally brought to the temple. And imagine, the Beit HaMikdash was filled, maybe a couple of thousands of them, with the sheep and the offerings and the sacrifices. How they would manage this was a remarkable feat, right? The sacrificial animal that had to be brought had to be a male lamb or a kid of the goat. It could be either one of them. It didn't have to be sheep only. Okay. It had to be either from a kid of the goats or a lamb which was under 1 year. It had to be a male. It had to be under 1 year, and it had to be brought. Now, a layman from every Israelite household in Yerushalayim and in the neighboring places And those people who traveled from all over the Galilee and all over who came to Jerusalem for the Passover, the place would be a buzz. It would be completely a buzz, and they would all be there. So I'm going to explain to you and tell you all how they would manage this. Okay, in short, before I really get on to what the wine and all this are about. So a nominated person per family would bring the animal to the Beth Hamikdash, to the temple. Okay, and then he would slaughter it. He would give the blood to the Kohens and the priests, and they would sprinkle it on the Beth Hamikdash. Okay, they would prepare the meat, give it back to him, and then he would bring it to the house and prepare it for the dinner, and then they would have the Pesach dinner. Now, why didn't they have wine in the first original Pesach? Because there was no time for it. But in subsequent Pesach Dorot, we see this cultural aspect that comes out, that every time you sit, you recline, and you partake of the Passover meal, you got to have wine, and that is not 1 cup, there are 4 cups of wine. Okay. We'll try and bring all that into perspective later. This Pesach offering had to be performed immediately after the evening Tamid offering. So as you all know, or if you all do know, we've studied this before, that the first offering in the morning and the last offering evening is called the Tamid offering. A continual offering that was given morning and evening in the temple. And as long as the temple stood, there's Tamid offering, which opened the day, the korbanot of the day, and which closed the korbanot of the day. So after this was done, then the Passover offering was allowed to enter into the temple, and everybody brought their own Passover offering, the sheep or the goat. If it was a Shabbat, then Shabbat took precedence. The Shabbat is sundown. So what they would do is, the Tamid offering would get over, they would move on to Pesach, and they would stall the Pesach. They would usher in the Shabbat offering, and the Shabbat, doing the Shabbat. Once the Shabbat was over, then they would continue with the Pesach offering, process it, and give the meat to the relevant person for him to take out. Why? Because Shabbat takes precedence over everything. Please make a note of this. It's very, very interesting now that, out of all the korbanot, the Pesach offering could be slaughtered by any normal person. It did not have to be the Kohens or the Levites or the priests. Okay, any person who was a layman from the children of Israel would bring his korban, and that korban representing all the names of the people who are going to partake of it, prearranged, that my name is in this house on this Pesach offering, and I cannot have my Pesach anywhere else. I can only have where my name is allotted to. So he, on the behalf of all of them, would bring the Pesach, and he would slaughter it and give it to the priests and the Levites and the Kohens, and then they would do whatever they do. We will see later how it was performed. How was this done? So immediately, once the Mincha offering, the Mincha, which is around sometime between 3 to 4 o'clock, around that time, was a time actually where the Pesach was actually slaughtered, because the Tamid offering was already done. Pesach. If it got late, okay, then things were pushed a little later. So all the people were divided into 3 groups. So if there were like 1,000 Pesach offerings to be given that very day, they were divided into 3. 300 plus 300, 300 plus like this, and they were divided. The first group would enter in. Okay, they would shut the doors of Yerushalayim, and then each one by turn would come, shet or slit the throat of the animal, and the Levites would collect the blood in a round vessel. Collect the blood in a round vessel, not a flat vessel where the blood would congeal and it would settle down. It was a round vessel where they could, keep the blood fluid and liquid all the time. Or they would stir it so the blood remained this thing. It was not a flat vessel. But from the place in the temple courtyard where the offering was done till the Mizbeach, all the priests and Levites would stand in a line, and they would take the blood with the vessel, give it to the next guy, and they would pass it and pass it and pass it and pass it till it reached the Mizbeach. And in Mizbeach, the blood was taken and it was sprinkled on the Mizbeach. And likewise, they would take the full and they would return the empty, right? So this is how the entire process happened. And it was really a sight. Believe so, it was a sight which was something overwhelming if you all can understand or you can picture how this happened. After this was done, the Pesach offering was taken. It was hung on special hooks. It was flayed. It was skinned. It was washed. The internal organs and the fat, the choice fats, were taken out, put into a vessel. It was salted. It was koshered and put on the grill on the Mizbeach and offered to the Lord. The choice fats, the liver, the kidney, the heart, and all was put over there with the choice fat, and it was offered as a choice offering to God. The meat that was hanging was washed, cleansed, koshered with salt, and handed over to the relevant person. This all took time. Okay, so please understand that this was not easy. Sometimes it went way into the night, and then that person would take his offering and he would bring it home. A roasting spit was prepared, and the entire animal from mouth to the rear was grilled through on a spit by a pomegranate rod, wood of pomegranate tree. Now, this is very interesting. This is where people, should try and understand why is the spit on the pomegranate tree, the wood of the pomegranate tree. Why is it done that way? Do you know the pomegranate? We know it's one of the 7 fruits of Israel, right? The pomegranate tree. The fruit of the pomegranate. I've never really got down to opening a pomegranate, really counting the pods inside. Okay, but it is said among the sages of Israel that each pomegranate has the potential for 613 pods in it that represent the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. So when that Pesach offering, that animal was grilled on that spit with the pomegranate rod, it's making a big statement that that Pesach animal was perfected by the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. Really amazing stuff, isn't it? Really amazing. Okay, but this sacrifice now of this Pesach was unlike the other korbanot. It came under the category of the shlamim offering. What is the shlamim offering? Shlamim offering is the Thanksgiving offering, is the whole offering. It's the peace offering. And the shlamim offering, like the Pesach offering, was a home, a house, meal-based mitzvah. Okay, out of all the korbanot, the sin offering could not leave the temple courtyard. And the other offerings could not leave the temple courtyard. The whole burnt offering could leave the temple courtyard. The red heifer was outside the Beth HaMikdash, in fact, outside the city walls. Okay, all these things. The shlamim offering and the Pesach offering could leave the temple and it would go out into the homes and it would be had in the homes. So it resembled that category of korbanot that could leave the temple courtyard and it would not get contaminated with tuma because the level of that offering was not of the sin offering. The sin offering strictly could not leave the confines of the temple courtyard. The person who was shechting the animal or slitting the throat or slaughtering it would not lay his hands on Shmika on the Pesach offering. Would not. It was bring the animal, cut it, give the blood. Simple as that. A Shmika offering is where you have atonement, where you lay the hands on the animal, you confess sins. Okay. That is why, if you read the book of Exodus, the book of Numbers and Vaikra, it never mentions the Pesach offering, the Passover offering as a sin sacrifice, because you do not put your hand on the animal and confess sin, and also it does not happen at all. It's not a sin sacrifice. The category of the Pesach is more of a shlamim offering, which is given in the Beth HaMikdash. All that was necessary for the person who was shechting it was for his kavanah, his intention to be perfectly right. This is very, very important, because if your kavanah is not right while you're shechting the animal, it kind of nullifies the entire effect of the Pesach that you're trying to perform. So the first group would enter in. This entire process was done while the doors were locked. Then that first group would exit out and wait in a certain area on the opposite side of the Beth HaMikdash. The door would open, the second group would come in, they would do the same. They would move out to another place. The third group would come in, the doors would lock, they would perform the Pesach, and then all three of the groups would collect. And then once the sun went down, whether it was Shabbat or not Shabbat, they would then proceed together to their homes and have the Pesach meal. So this is how it was performed during those times. Pre-exilic time, the Pesach Dorot happened continually in the temple. Post-exilic times, from Nehemiah till the second temple, it was not so frequent. The Pesach was not so frequent. Towards the second temple era, it became mandatory, obligatory, and because of rabbinical decrees, a lot of things happened, and so it became very, very, it was continual year after year. Now, the first Pesach I told you it was fast. It happened in a jiffy, it had to move. So there was not much of a cedar kind of atmosphere that was created. They cut it, they put the blood on the lamppost, on the lintel, they ate it with the bitter herbs and the matzah. They got up and they had to leave by the morning, and they were out of there. By the time it came to the second and the third and the fourth time, the year succeeding, that's when things started changing. So that's how they set up a system called the Seder. And now, because they were not in a hurry, they would sit back and they would recline on the left side and they would drink the wine. Okay, we're going to learn why the wine is important, what the wine symbolizes. They would eat the matzah, eat this thing. So it was not like the first Pesach. Please make a note of this. Now, in Exodus chapter 12, let me read from Exodus chapter 12. It says, from verse 1, 2, and 3, let's read from verse 3. It says, Daberu el chol edat Israel le'amor. Be'aser lakodesh hadze wa'ikhu lahem. Ish say, lebait avot say lebait. Speak to the whole congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they shall take for themselves a man flock according to each father's house for each household. The word ish say, ish, is male, right, in Hebrew. Ish is male. And say is lamb, either the kid of the goat or the sheep. Ish say. But if you're looking at the Torah out here, and if you're looking at the Hebrew language, there's something which is, grammatically superfluous. Why I'm saying superfluous? Because it says, he uses the word ish say. You could have used the word zachor, but it says a man sheep, ish say. Now this is amazing. So what's the Torah actually saying out here? It's trying to imply that every household who has a big household, mother, father, brother, sisters, children, this, grandparents, everything, on their behalf, this ish say, this man who's representing all of them, this man, okay, who has lamb-like qualities, would perform the Pesach for them. This is strictly home and house oriented korbanot. And the stress was on eating the Pesach. You perform it by eating the Pesach. So Pesach is a eating festival compared to everything else, because the korbanot, the sin offering and the whole other offerings, they were eaten by the priests, not by the people. So they had to take this man, or appoint this man, the layman, the normal Israelite, who was, if I paraphrase this, sheep-like in who he is, and he would go and perform the Pesach offering on behalf of them and bring it to them so they could have it in the night. If the household was too few for what comes from a flockling, then he and his neighbor next to his house will take it according to the assessment of the souls. So if there was a small family and the meat was too much, they were allowed to bring in your neighbors or someone close who you all were close with, and they would sit in one house, and the names would be inscribed on that Pesach offering. They could not go anywhere else to partake of anybody else's Pesach offering. If your name was on this offering, that's where you had to partake of it. So it was subscribed in advance. What does this mean? Really, what does this mean? Okay, and according to the assessment of souls, each one corresponding to his eating, we shall assess with the flockling. I'm just setting everything, so I'll do the explanation a little later. Okay, where are we? Okay, a flawless flockling, a year-old male shall you come to have. Now here, see what it says, right? It says, say tamim, a flockling that is without blemish. Tamim from the word tam, unblemished. Zachar, male, ben shana, male, the son of the year. That means it had to be a 1-year-old male. Why couldn't have said this in verse 3? Verse 3 uses the word ish say. So the emphasis which I'm trying to tell you is, the emphasis first is that it had to be this man who was lamb-like, who had to perform the Pesach, appointed by the family. Okay, and then it goes on to give, okay, you will take a male of the first year, and he will bring a male of the first year, and from you, and you can take it from the sheep or from the goat. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So this puts something in our mind now as to, people don't even know. They always think of the Passover lamb as lamb, sheep. No, it could be even from the goat. Absolutely from the goat. So on the 14th of Nisan, at around Mincha time, after the Tamid offering was given, the Pesach was slain. Okay. And then it was brought, as I told you, with matzah, maror, and it was had in the first Pesach. In the succeeding Dorot Pesach, no, a cedar was created. And in the cedar, now they started using wine. So what changed? What was so important about wine? Why was wine introduced into this Passover cedar? Okay, So let's understand this word Seder in the first place. What is the word Seder? Samek Dalet Resh, Seder simply means an order of service. Okay, it means order of service. So what the scribes and the Pharisees done, because it was a remembrance of that original Passover, and the commandment and the mitzvah was that you will diligently teach your children and show them and tell them about the Pesach. Therefore, they made a complete Seder and they wrote it down in a book called the Haggadah. Okay, and they made a full litany for it, as how it was said, what to say, what was used, and then they used, they made a Seder plate, and they use a lot of allegory and imagery, and a lot of things were added, and the wine was added to everything. Now, the question is, since we're studying wine today, why wine? Because the original Pesach never had wine with it. But why was wine added in the subsequent ones? Okay, so wine, if you look at it correctly from the biblical perspective, it has many, many functions, right? Wine is very royal in its essence biblically. It's a drink fit for kings and emperors. Okay, they all partook of wine and the cups of wine. You'll have read the Bible, you'll understand all these things, right? Why? Because wine talks about, and it makes a statement of freedom and not slavery. From one angle of it, that I am free, I have nobody on me, I am not a slave anymore. Therefore, I can recline on my left hand, eat my meal, and drink my wine. So that's one way of looking at it. Okay, that I'm a free person. Therefore, I drink my wine. I can recline while having my Passover and drink my wine. So typically, every Jewish household, subsequent generations would recline on their divans on their left-hand side like this, and they would eat, and they would drink the 4 cups of wine while the Pesach was performed. Great, wonderful. So wine brought out the gladness of the soul. It opened the soul of every human being. No matter what people say, alcohol has a great effect on a person. Some people can imbue alcohol and he starts acting mad and starts speaking Chinese and gibberish. Some people, for them, it's a downer. They start crying. Some people get overjoyed, right? Nevertheless, out of all of this, what does alcohol do? What does wine do? It opens a person's soul. It opens his heart out. You see, a drunk person can never lie. Can never lie. Only truth comes out. And this is what it does. It brings out, it removes the scales of inhibition, and only truth comes out. Gladness, openness, truth. And when a soul has had enough of wine, all that inhibition goes. There's a sense of being free, a sense of freedom, right? I don't know how many of you all have actually partaken of alcohol. When we were young, we used to all drink alcohol. At least I used to drink alcohol. And there's a sense of, I'm like the king of the world, right? So that was one aspect of understanding why was wine used, because it had to imbue into the children of Israel that you are no more slaves now. It's gladness. You recline and you drink and you enjoy yourselves. You be in comfort while you're eating and while you're drinking. That brought out the Seder where they had to recline, drink, and eat, and all that stuff and happen. And then culturally, many, many things were added, and the Seder was the Seder that we have today. It's so overlapped with the Haggadah and so much of cultural aspects and allegories and similes and stories like Khat Gadya and all these other things. It's no more. It's not the Pesach of Egypt. Okay, so get this out of your mind. Okay, we have to look through the complexities of that cultural overtones and understand what is this all about, and that's what we're trying to do. Okay. A few of the reasons why also wine is drunk during the Pesach. In Shemot 6:6, in Exodus 6:6, it talks about the 4 steps, right? That is, I shall take you out of Egypt, I will rescue you. The third cup is, I will redeem you, right? And I will bring you into the land, and I will take you as a people, and I will be your God, and you will be my people, right? So these 4 steps that God had mentioned in chapter 6, verse 6, are the 4 cups, okay, that is done during the Passover. So they've taken that and they've made it into a full litany and an order of service. Another reason why wine is used is because Paro bloodied himself with the blood of the Jewish children. He bloodied himself because he ordered the Jewish children to be slaughtered. And he bloodied himself with that. Okay, so on Pesach, it's preferable to have red wine. You can have any other wine, yellow, scarlet, burgundy, that's okay. But red wine is preferable to have because it resembles blood. Okay, please keep this in mind. And another reason that they have is because they want to connect and remember of the Jewish children that were slaughtered by Paro. Another way to look at it is that it resembles the 4 exiles the children of Israel would go through in the future generations. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, almost the same, the Greek, and now this is the exile of Rome. And this is the longest and the most difficult. 2000 years now, the Jewish people are in exile because Rome has destroyed them. It's called also the exile of Esau and Rome. And the longest, the most painful, being without a temple, without a Beit Mikdash, without being able to do many things. Okay, it resembles this. There are many ways to look at it. Okay, but the most impactful of this is that when you study the Jewish mystical studies, and they talk about the Tuma and the Tahara, the pure and the impure forces that are in this world, right? This Tuma and this Tahara, or this divinity and this anti-divinity, if you want to call it, if you want to look at it that way, this Tuma and this Tahara, because Tuma means spiritual impurity. Okay, and Tahara means purity. Now, when we're talking about purity and impurity, it's not what you think it is. Because you can take the most dirtiest vessel and it can be pure in the sight of God. Or you can take the most cleanest vessel and it can be the most impure. So Tahara and Tuma cannot be calibrated on any scientific scale. It is only a spiritual condition that cannot be seen with the physical eyes or calibrated on any metaphysical or on a physical level. On Passover, when we celebrate the physical freedom, when you talk about the physical coming out of Egypt, it is also celebrated from the liberation from all these spiritual forces of Tuma and moving into Tahara. The physical departure from Egypt is a reflection of the spiritual one. The children of Israel were pulled from the clutches of depravity and impurity and Tuma and brought onto the path of receiving the Torah and connecting with God. Now, what is the defining factor that separates the Tuma from the Tahara? God had instituted in every soul after the sin of Adam and Chava, because Before they sinned, they were just pure tahara. They were just pure, absolutely. In fact, they had nothing to separate them from God. But because of the impurity, God made them a garment. This garment is called a klipa. Kalipa. When you're looking at kalipa, it's like a husk, it's like a shell, much like a fruit. A fruit has a skin around it, right? A shell. Depending on the type of fruit, if you take a hard walnut, you have to break it. Can't get through it. If you're taking a grape, that represents the perfect klipa. The skin is so soft and it's translucent. You can see through it. And that's why the grape, when it is crushed, and everything is crushed, it gives you the wine. Because the klipa is now reached a level of klipa noga, of effervescent light. So that husk and that garment that God put on every soul that's born after the sin, now not only is it separating the tuma outside from the essence of the person inside, it's shielding the person so the person does not get contaminated easily inside from the tuma outside. That was the reason this klipa was put. This klipa also separates us from the knowledge and knowing of God. We have to work our way out of this klipa. Break this klipa. Shut it. Open it out. The covenant to break this klipa or to remove the klipa was given to Avraham Avinu by the way of Brit Milah, circumcision. So the covenant of circumcision was given to Avram because he was the initiator, he was a starter of showing people how do you deal with this klipa and circumcise it. So the covenant of circumcision of the klipa was given to Abraham. And he was to teach subsequent generations how this one break open the klipa and open yourself out and start knowing God, because every soul that's born is in this husk, is in this klipa. When a person lives in impurity, the klipa is dirty, it is filthy, it's a filthy garment. And the filthy garment breaks out from the spiritual realm into a physical realm, and then you have all the issues and diseases and problems and all because of the contamination of this klipa. But a person who's, for example, a Jewish person who eats kosher and has kashrut and lives a clean life according to the Torah, not according to any other sense of what it's supposed to be like, strictly according to what we know of the Torah, the klipa is like a grape. It's effervescent. You can see through it. And the contact with the Shekinah glory of God and the Spirit of the living God is beautiful. That is why Yeshua says, I am the true wine. Because the klipa that he was existing in while he was walking on this earth, in fact, was absolutely negligible. He says, I work and my Father works, right? It was open communication up and down with Yeshua and me. This is what we need to achieve. This is what we need to think. So coming out, not only from Egypt or Mitzrayim and the physical assets, but coming out on the spiritual breaking through by way of circumcision also is important. And this covenant was given to Abraham. Now, the physical cut of the foreskin was only an enactment, a seal, a mark that this person is a Jew and he's in the process of dealing with his klipa. So it's about coming out spiritually from Mitzrayim, and Mitzrayim that you're a part of spiritually also. So therefore, when you look at the Passover Seder, Okay, it's a completely midrashic interpretation of Shemot. So they've taken Shemot and they've made it into a huge cultural cedar with all its complexities, and they've used eggs and boiled eggs and parsley and this, all they put together is midrashic in this context. Okay, but it's telling a story. It's telling its story. Hmm. But let's come to wine. Why is it wine? Why is wine important in all of this? Now, do you remember the time in the book of Exodus or in the book of Leviticus it says that you will have, in fact, book of Exodus, it says that you will have the Pesach in one house. In one house. And you will not take the meat outside, you will not break its bone, and you will not boil the meat. You will have it in one house. Because by having it in one house and having the meal with every person that know, you know everyone. That means your knowing of people is very, very important. You got to know who you're sitting and having this meal with. And this fosters a thing called kibur or linking. The word kibur means to link, to attach in tightness and intimacy. Okay, and this is very, very important. Where there's intimacy, there's perfect relationships. Where there's perfect relationship, there is no transgression and there's no sin. So the prerequisites of having the Pesach were that you have to be in the state of kibur, perfect relationships, no sin, and also circumcised. Not only physically, but circumcised, as I told you about the klipa, in a spiritual way, that the klipa that covers your heart and you're disconnected from God. The red wine, why do we use red wine? Because it resembles the two bloods. One is the blood of the circumcision, the other is the blood of the Pesach, which was performed by the Jewish people, by which they gained merit for this redemption. So they could not partake of the Pesach until they never experienced the blood of the circumcision. That is why it's very, very clear. It says that no uncircumcised person can partake of the Pesach offering. The person had to be circumcised. Even if he's bought by money, he's part of your house, he's lived with you, he's become a ger, he's not even a ger toshav, he's a ger tzaddik, and he's circumcised by two levels. Not only the physical level, but definitely on the spiritual level, the klipa around the heart is being dealt with, and he's understanding, he's getting closer, he's in the process. That person can only partake of the Pesach offering. Red wine also resembles divine judgment, because we see in the book of Revelations, Hit Galut, God is constantly, the imagery in the book of Revelation is that the wrath is pouring out cups of wrath on the earth, right? Divine judgment, divine judgment, divine judgment. Later on, during the Passover Seder, okay, there is a thing called the spilling of the wine, okay, and that resembles something which we're going to talk about. Just give me a minute before I tell you now. I'll come to the closure of what this wine, why we are bringing this wine. The actual role of the wine, why it is brought into the Pesach Seder, is for the role of sanctification. Because the wine has a power to sanctify the day from any other day. How do you separate something from something else? It's because you separate the good from the bad, the pure from the impure, the good days from the bad days. So if you want to say that Chag Pesach is a day that's holy, it's sanctified, because God says you will sanctify the day, you need something to sanctify the day with. And that is good wine. Now we are getting to understand the complexities of how wine has the essence of separating the holy day from the mundane, the pure from the impure. It removes the zuhama, the poison of creation, and renders it clean. We select the good from the bad, the pure from the impure. It also it resembles the wine of the kingdom of God, which Yeshua referred to. I think he says in Matthew 26, 20-30, he says, "This is the blood of the covenant. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for you for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now until the day when I drink it anew in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives and they sung the Hallel. That's Tehillim 113 to 118. So this is the first indication that Yeshua had something like a Passover meal with his disciples. But no, but the problem is the Passover meal is time specific. It had to be at its appointed time. We know that the time of the Passover being shechted on the 14th of Nisan, Yeshua was on the cross. Or supposedly he was on the cross at that point of time. So how could he have done the Passover prior to that? Because that was not the appointed time. It does not make sense. It does not make sense, my friends. Unless he time jumped or he done some time travel and he took everybody into time travel and he made a Passover meal. And I really can't answer that. But it's very interesting when you look at it like this, because Pesach is time bound in its perspective. You cannot have it at any other time. And by the way, when the Pesach was being slaughtered in the temple, they were constantly singing with brass and with cymbals and with harps. They were singing the Hallel. And if the Hallel got over, they'd start all over again. For the first batch, the second batch, and the third batch. So when we look at sanctification, the actual thing of sanctification, what does wine do? It separates the normal and the mundane from the holy. That is why when you start a Passover Seder, the first thing that you do is start with the Kaddish. The Kaddish separates the day. Now on Wednesday night, if you all had joined us with prayers, and because it was Pesach night that day, we said the Kaddish and we sanctified the day with wine. And there was a specific reason why I done it in that day. Because I wanted to show you all that, how do you separate a day is by doing a good thing. By separating the good from the bad and having that wine. And that is why you have Kaddish. The entire Seder starts with the Kaddish. Let's read how the Kaddish is performed and how it is said, okay? So typically, the first cup of the Passover Seder is filled with wine. And it's raised by the person who's leading the Seder. And he says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Praised are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. And then it says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mechol am ve'rumamnu mechol lashon uchadashnu be'mitzvotav vatiten lanu yihye Eloheinu be'ahava ve'shabbatot Stot Menucha, and it goes on, and say, let me read in the English because most of you won't understand. Praised are you, Lord of God, ruler of the universe, who has chosen us from among the peoples and the languages and made us holy through your mitzvot. You've separated us, giving us and lovingly festivals of joy. And you know what the word is for joy? Is the word sason, which I want to talk to you all about, right? And special times for celebration. This Passover, this is a sacred gathering to commemorate the exodus from Egypt. You have chosen us, you have shared your holiness with us among all other peoples. For with festive revelations of your holiness, happiness, and joy, you have granted us lovingly and joyfully the holidays. Praised are you, Lord, who sanctifies Israel and the festivals. And therefore, you have 4 cups of wine that symbolizes the separation, the sanctification of the day, the separation of peoples, formed the nations and the goyim. You've sanctified us, you've made us holy, and you separated us for your will and for your purpose and for your own joy and will, Lord. So, what does wine do? I hope you'll have got the gist of what I'm trying to tell. What does wine do? It sanctifies, it cleanses, it purifies, it separates. Now, this word sason, festivals of joy. I think many seasons ago, or a couple of shiurs ago, I spoke about the joy of the Torah. I think it was in Kabbalah Torah. In Parsha Yitro, I think in Parsha Yitro, we studied about joy and the 4 levels of joy, right? If you all were there, if you all remember, we studied about Kedva, the exhilaration, that spurt of, you just know something and you're like, oh, wow, amazing. That spurt of joy, which happened to Yitro, right? And that changed him fundamentally as a person. That exhilaration is like a surge inside a person. He gets that joy. To know what an amazing and wonderful thing the God of Israel is. And now he knows, he says, I know who the true God of Israel is. That is Chidwa. If you all have not seen that video, please see it. The second level is when you take that joy, the exhilaration, and you stay upon it. It becomes a part of you. You contemplate, and that is Simcha. Simcha, when that joy pervades your entire body. Third level is Gili, where the fire, now you dwell on it so much that it bursts into flames in your heart. A different level of joy. And the last is Sason. Sason, now you are enveloped, you're one. Your entire body from top to down is like anointing of God's Holy Spirit. You're just enveloped with that anointing, enveloped with that joy and that peace and that happiness. That is Sason. See what the Braka is saying out here. That in this festival of Sason and special times for celebrations, this Passover, this sacred gathering to commemorate the exodus from Egypt. So what was the goal of this? You sanctify all of this because wine, I told you, removes the inhibition. It accelerates your closeness with God. It opens out truth. Your heart opens out. It enables you, if it's done correctly, and it sanctifies God. So that is why it was installed in Pesach Dorot in subsequent generations. It was installed in Passover Seders, and it is used Passover Seders. Now, the 4 cups, right? Let's go to the 4 cups. During the Seder, there are 4 cups of wine, each signifying a certain level of God acquiring Israel for himself through expressions of redemption in describing the exodus of Egypt and a birth of a nation. So, the blood that was put of the Pesach lamb on the lintel and the doorpost was like a child being born. It resembles a womb. That in that blood of the Pesach, you were waddling, you were messing around in that blood. and in the blood of your circumcision. Two bloods. I will take you out, first cup. I will save you from the hand of Pharaoh and bring you to Mount Sinai, right? And the third cup is I will redeem you, I will pay a price for you. And this is the third cup of wine that is said and performed after the meal. So after the Seder meal, where you sit and have a hearty meal, you take the third cup and you give the blessing, and that's the cup of redemption. It's called the cup of redemption. If you're reading the Gospels and the Besorah, you will realize that it says that after they had finished the meal, Yeshua and his disciples, Yeshua lifted the cup and he said, this is the cup of the new covenant which I've made for you, or renewed covenant which I've of my blood, which was shed for you and for many for the remission of sins. Okay, and do this as often as you can in remembrance of me. Now, this is the point. This third cup, the cup of redemption, is the third point that brings the Jew and the Gentile together. And the fourth cup is the cup that I will take you as a nation. So we recite the Kaddish over the first cup. We do the Magid, the story of the Exodus, over the second cup. We recite grace after meal over the third cup, also called the cup of redemption. And we sing the Hallel and praises, that's Psalm 113 and 219 over the fourth cup. Now it also says that after they had sung and had finished the meal and they drank the wine, then Jesus and his disciples, they went out to the Garden of Gethsemane after singing hymns. This is what they were doing. They were performing the full level of the Passover Seder. But the Passover Seder then was, I'm very, very sure it was very, very different than what it is today. Because today it is, it's so modernized and so many things. But during Jesus' time, it may have been very, very simple. Have the Passover, have the maror, have the bitter herbs, you sing hymns, you drink the 4 cups of wine, you remember the story. That's it. During the Seder, besides these 4 cups, everyone takes a 5th cup in his hand of wine. Okay. And what does he do? He takes a broken vessel, a broken kind of cup or a plate or something, and he spills drops of wine. 1, 2, 3. And as he's spilling this wine, he's recounting each of the 10 plagues. Lice, frogs, darkness, locusts, right? Fire and ice. And he drops it into this broken vessel. Why this broken vessel? Because the broken vessel resembles a soul that is not rectified. Therefore, the cup of wrath, now wine also now is like a cup in the hand of God. The cup of wrath that pours out, it resembles that cup of wrath, which is also futuristic, right? We read in the book of Revelations. And God poured out from his cup of wrath all the plagues on Egypt. This broken vessel comes back to the klipa. It comes back to the klipa of the soul. And the klipa obstructs the divine light and separates the person's knowing of God that needs to be removed by this process of circumcision. The slicing or the removal of this klipa is a secret to the Brit Milah, the covenant of circumcision given to Abraham. Therefore, when you're doing the Seder, there are so many things that one has to reminiscence about, understand, reflect about. It's not something you just perform and you just have a good time and you walk away. It's not that, my friends. The power of this blood to purify, clean, separate, to atone is very much Torah. In the Old Testament, they used the blood of innocent animals to atone, but the blood of the animals never reached to the level of the sophistication of a man. Never. Because the animal soul is in the blood. God says for the life of the soul is in the blood. So the animal, the sheep or the goat or whatever was slaughtered, that had a very simplistic sophistication compared to the man who had a very complex sophistication in his blood. So there are two levels now we need to think about. One is God told Adam that if you eat of this, you will die. So the moment they ate of it, death came into their being, and the sting of death was a part of all humanity. Besides that, every other thing that Adam done, the Zuham of creation that he came was coming and was attacking him on that klipa. He was accumulating patches of dirt, like soil garments. You read in the book of Zechariah, right? It says Joshua and Zerubbabel, they came and they had dirty garments. And they came and stood before the Lord. God said, clean them, freshen them, give them new garments. That's klipa. Therefore, the blood of the animal could never really deal with the sophistication of the human being. So in the Old Testament, the sting of death always remained with the human being. But his daily sins and transgressions, God had told them to use the blood of animals for simplistic and for sins that were not, or rather sins that were, it was unintentional. Intentional sins had to be dealt with Day of Atonement. And to some extent, even that also was questionable. But all the korbanot and sacrifices dealt with unintentional sins. Please make a note of this. So the animal blood and all, was for the day, and the next day you're back to square one again. But here comes now the Ish say, the man, whose blood, the sophistication of that blood can be for all humanity. It's not animal blood, it's human blood. But that human blood is not the blood of you and me. That's a different level of blood that was coursing through Yeshua's, through his veins, through his system. Because Yeshua was not there in the Garden of Eden. He was not part. He was not involved at all in the sting of death. So by default, he never had the sting of death in him. And then he perfected the 613 commandments, which are the mitzvot. Therefore, he never had transgression or sin on his own. Never. Now, this should start making you think on a different level altogether. He was so pure, absolutely pure. The blood that was coursing through his veins, from an earthly perspective, was, it was frightening to the darkness. It was absolutely, they were livid. They couldn't handle it because it was so pure. It was not contaminated like you and me. Ooh, that was something else. Therefore, his spilling of his blood, the power, you can't even begin to imagine. Absolutely can't even begin to imagine. Because his nefesh now is not like the nefesh that you and me have. It's not. It's of a different quality. It's in the highest level of purity. That's why he's called the second Adam. Because the first Adam, before the sin, was of a different level and quality altogether. Till he fell from grace and he fell into this impure state. But Yeshua, the second Adam, whoa, he was something else. Because the nefesh of the animal and the blood of the animal could not catapult the human being and break through this zohama, it took a perfect human being with the sophistication of the human soul to bring us into the Kadosh Kadoshim, into the Holy of Holies. Please make a note of this. Very, very important. The third cup is so important to the Jew and the Gentile. It's very important. And this is called the cup of redemption, right? It's significant for the nations, especially because it's the amalgamation, it's the coming through of two peoples. The Jew is circumcised and can partake of the Pesach. The Goy is not, or the person from the nation is not circumcised. How can he partake of the Pesach? We're left with a problem now. Really big problem. But Rav Shaul says, what does Rav Shaul say? He says in the book of Galatians, he says, who is the Jew? A person who's circumcised in his heart. Are you all getting now how if a Jew who is physically circumcised, who's also dealing with his klipa and circumcised in the klipa, he's a real Jew. Not only a person who's only physically circumcised and living like the nations, in the sight of God, he's not a Jew. So he's telling the Jews, he says, 1 second, y'all are sitting and telling the Goyim, y'all have to get circumcised, have to get circumcised. That's fine. That's fine. But tell me, y'all are circumcised physically, but are you really circumcised in the heart? No, because you're physically circumcised, but you're doing the impurities of the nations. Therefore, your circumcision has become of no use. Whereas the nations who are coming into faith and who are sanctified by the Holy Spirit of God are getting their hearts circumcised, therefore the physical circumcision takes of no effect. No effect. He's trying to make the Jewish people and the nations understand the same thing. So it was imperative that Yeshua, through this cup of redemption, we've understood the blood, how important his blood was. Okay, we've understood now that through this cup of redemption, that he's able to craft the nations in by the Holy Spirit, by the outpouring and sanctifying them and circumcising the hearts and say, okay, now get into line. Now you're able to come and do the Pesach with everybody else. But are we keeping the Pesach? That is my point. My point is that, are we keeping the Pesach? Are we really sanctifying everything in our lives? The blood has many functions, like the wine. And having this wine in Pesach encompasses so many functionalities of the blood. For 2000 years, traditional Christianity stuck on this cup of redemption. And I mean, that's all we need, right? That's all a Christian needs. It's a cup of redemption. But really, when are we going to have a broader picture to understand that the redemption has happened, now what? Now I have been circumcised in the heart by the sanctification of the Holy Spirit. And now what? Do I remain isolated, or do I join with the covenant God made with the Jewish people and keep the mitzvah? Because that's the goal. That is the goal of all things. And just as bread is the process of elevating a soul, we studied about the bread last time. Drinking the blood is an allegory for sanctification and separation of oneself in purity. The blood of Mashiach remains critical and absorbing his qualities in exchange for your impurity. So therefore, the power of the Passover lamb is the essence of the Passover lamb that is able to absorb your impurities. It is not a sin offering. If you come to the Passover lamb and you exchange it for your impurities, it will happen. When you read the 4 Gospels, you're reading, I think in Matthew it's very extensive about that night. In Luke, it gives you a little. In John, it gives you sufficient enough. But it gives you all different versions of what happened that night. It's pretty amazing. In the book of Matthew, it says, and there were 2 days for the Passover. And on the first day of the Passover, they all gathered. And how can they be gathering on the first day of the Passover? Sometimes I'm astounded by how it's written. The Gospels are written in the Greek because it is so garbled that only you get a trained eye to see what's happening in the New Testament. It's like someone who's like, just given an account of something without even understanding the integrities and the small things of Pesach. And about, it's such a written in such a hurry that even the bread that Yeshua used was artoi, it was not epignon. It was leavened bread, not unleavened bread. So that puts another question. Did Yeshua actually have Passover with leavened bread? Impossible that he would have done something like that. How is it possible? But out of all of this, I want everybody to understand that the power of the blood, that's the wine, okay, that we're talking about. It has many, many functions, and the most important function is the sanctification of everything. Therefore, you start the Passover Seder with the Kaddish, and you end the Passover Seder with the Kaddish again. Kaddish means you end singing the Hallel by drinking the 4th cup of the wine. It opens and it closes the Seder. And in everything, it opens and closes the Seder. Every Shabbat, we drink wine. Why do we drink wine? And the Jewish people have challah, raised bread. They don't have matzah bread on Shabbat. Why? And why the Shabbat overrides everything? Because you have challah bread, you have raised bread in Shabbat. That's the raised bread that is the continuation of Shavuot. When you reach Shavuot, when your soul reaches Shavuot, and you're having raised bread, you're supposed to keep it every Shabbat. You got to maintain that level of bread. The soul needs to maintain the raised of the raised bread. That means you're on a very high level. That's why Shabbat overrides everything else. And you have wine because you sanctify the every Kaddish. You do a Kaddish for every Shabbat. We can look at so many angles of the wine, so many angles of its application. The study is never ending, friends, really never ending. But it's important to understand in context how this is done. What is this all about? The last time I made a statement saying that the Pesach animal, say the lamb or the kid, was the god of Egypt. because it resembled the month of Aries. It is the month of Aries. And the constellation Aries was a ram. And they slaughtered it in the month of Aries when it's on the height, the full moon, on the height of the power of the ram, of that force, that spiritual force that was governing that month. God said, slaughter it. But then if I look at it from that angle, I'm thrown into a complete conundrum now, from a Christian point of view. So if God says you will slaughter that, why am I worshipping the Passover lamb? Really? We left in a quandary, friends out here. You must understand that it had to be rejected by the Jewish people, and it had to be slaughtered because that Passover lamb resembled the nations, the impurity of the nations. Yeshua, even though in the Bible says that he who knew no sin became sin. Sin was put upon him, not inside of him, it was put upon him. So he, as an allegory, everything that Yeshua done was an allegory of all the things that we've studied so far. Please make a note of this. But in truth, I'm coming and reiterating this fact altogether. What Yeshua done is very, very important because he took spiritual guarantee for all those who came to him and all those who come to him. He laid down his life. And by laying down his life, it does not fit into any of the korbanot of the Levitical priesthood. Does not. It does not. Yes, but his life was korban chai. He was put to death because of the iniquities and the sins of the people. Let me get this straight now. The Passover lamb is roasted on a wooden stalk of a pole of the pomegranate tree. And I mentioned to you the pomegranate tree has 613 pods inside of it, right? Which is the 613 commandments of the Torah. All the mitzvot are divided into positive and negative mitzvot. You break a positive mitzvot, it has its consequences and it has its process of rectification. You break the negative commandments, it has its process of rectification, restitution, and its consequences. When you break a positive commandment, how do you handle it? How do you restitute for it? How do you rectify? Or you break a negative commandment, how do you rectify? There is a sin that leads to death, and there is a sin that does not lead to death. How do you differentiate between this? For the Jewish nation, they had the Torah, it was given to them. And they had to, on a daily basis, they had to sort out their sins and their transgressions and keep maintaining the sublimity of the spiritual state before God. If they didn't do it, they would fall into iniquity that would lead into breaking the negative commandments. And by breaking the negative commandments, you are eligible for karet and for death. If they maintained that level of not even breaking a positive commandment, forget the negative, of not even breaking a positive commandment, there would be no need even to give him a sacrifice in the temple. The sacrifices in the temple were a need because I broke a commandment. But when I'm not breaking any commandment, I don't need to give a sacrifice in the temple. So the reason they were coming giving sacrifice and sin offerings, because they were eligible for death. And when God seen that they were not able to do it, death had to be paid for. The life had to be paid for by death. Therefore, Yeshua had to die. Now, that's for the Jewish people. But what about the nations? What about the Goyim? They don't have the Torah. The Torah was not given to them. The commandments are not given to them. They by nature and by default deserve death. That's why the cross is very important to the people who come from the nations, Akka Christians, if you want to call them. It's very important. How can there be rejection of the cross in Christianity? It cannot be. It's the foundation of Christianity, the cross, because we all deserve death. But the Jews, it was not obligatory for them to have the cross. If they had lived correctly, no. Since they were not living correctly and they were living like us, Paul says, their circumcision has become uncircumcised. Therefore, you also have to go to the process of the cross. You also have to sanctify yourself like this. We have much to talk about all these things, my friends, but understand that the blood of Mashiach is the essence of who he is. His divine force, that divine force that's flowing through him, that he's sharing, he's purifying, he's cleansing everybody who comes to him. He's like this sponge that comes and absorbs all your impurities and gives you back life. That is the role of the Passover lamb. That is the provision God made for everybody. And that's a part of his blood that resembles his wine. And he talks about this wine, because the wine now, I have tried my best to give you all many angles of the wine and how it is used and why it is used. Festivals of joy, Sason. Let us be able to reach that level. Not only Chedwa, not only Simcha, not only Gili. These levels of Sason. Ecstatic. Covered around with fire. Full anointing. That's where we need to reach, my friends. So this Pesach, I hope you all have been blessed. If you all have understood so many different angles to everything. And please reflect on all that we've studied, we've learned. I've got the script with me. I will send it to you all now because it's ready. And if you all have any questions, please do write to me. Call me if you'll have my number. And I'm willing and open to talk to everybody. Yeah. To we meet next time, friends. God bless. I hope you'll have a wonderful Pesach and this coming season till Shavuot. God bless each one of you all. And Shabbat Shalom.